This time of year can be super overwhelming because the amount of weeds that we're growing. Weeds are the leading cause for gardeners to give up gardening completely. And there's a few steps that you can do to stop the overwhelm and make gardening way more enjoyable during this incredibly weedy season. There are 3 types of weeds that you really need to know. There's annual weeds, which means they come up every year and they go to seed, which means they have flowers. The flowers produce seeds, they drop on the ground and they germinate every single year. Whereas you have perennial weeds, a bit like stinging nettles and bindweed, and they come up year after year after year and get killed off by the frost. And then you have biennial weeds, which are weeds that grow one year and then flower the next year. Those are things like burdock and greater dog. Perennial weeds and biennial weeds are the worst things that I have down the allotment. Here in the home garden, it's mostly annual weeds. Although some weeds are very good for the pollinators and they really do enjoy them. Overall, if you have weeds in your bed, your vegetables that you're growing will either produce less or just be smaller, because each weed is competing with the nutrients, light and space of your plants. So the more weeds you have in the bed, the less likely you are to have a really good harvest. By removing them from the bed, you really have an overall better yield, which is super important, especially when you have things like onions and garlic and carrots. They don't compete very well with weeds, which means that overall you don't have as big crops, which means they don't store as well. And when we're trying to grow a year's worth of food, it's really important that we have as big crops as possible because they store so much better. Talking about hands-on labour, I decided this week to try out something that, to be honest, I've never tried before, and that was homemade weed killer. Homemade weed killer is something that I've seen so many positive reviews about, but I've never actually used myself. And watching all the reviews, I thought to myself, how is that so possible that it's so good? So I decided to make some up, and I used a gallon container, and I added 1/2 cup of salt, 1/2 cup of oil, 1/2 cup of lemon juice, and I've topped the rest up with vinegar, just normal everyday vinegar. I used white vinegar because it's cheap and cheerful. The vegetable oil that I used sticks all of the ingredients to the leaf, which is important because you don't want it all running straight off. And the lemon juice burn the leaves and dry it out, and so does the salt. So it's really effective as a weed killer, apparently. So I used this old container, which honestly was really difficult to open but worked out really well. I added the weed killer into this container and I sprayed away. The thing I didn't want is to use one of my other sprayers, forget about it, and spread the weed killer all the way around my plot, because I use them things like neem oil, etc. What I found is you really do want to spray this solution really heavily. Traditional weed killer, you only want to spray it so that it covers the leaves but doesn't drip down. This you really wanted to drip down onto the floor. So I sprayed everything super heavily with it. When you are spraying weed killer, even if it's traditional weed killer or this weed killer, you do want to pick a day with no wind and a forecast of incredibly hot, dry weather. You do not want rain. If rain will wash it off and it will not work. And I was super excited about it. I used it on stinging nettles, bindweed, and some annual weeds, some burdock and some greater dog. And the results absolutely staggered me. But before we go on to the results, let's talk about some other weed preventing methods that you can use that are super easy and save not only time, but your overall vegetable yield, especially when the weeds are going absolutely mental. The most simple and basic way of weeding, particularly if you're a small scale gardener, is hand weeding. You don't need any special tools, and honestly, it is the best way to really pinpoint small weeds and get them out before they're a massive problem. The most effective way of doing this is removing the whole root, which can be quite difficult with things like perennials. Hand weeding is really effective when it's around very fragile seedlings like carrot seeds. It's very hard to see where they're growing. They're so whispery. So it is a case of getting down dirty and pulling them out by hand. But sooner they are more established, then you can mulch them and you can get the hoe in there, which makes it so much easier and more sustainable for weeding. One of the best ways to remove weeds without damaging your seedlings is by hoeing. Hoe. This is an oscillating hoe, which sounds really technical, but all it means is there's a blade edge there and there's a blade edge there. So in every single action that you're using, you're actually cutting the weeds. This is a really great thing to do on a really hot sunny day like this, because then you don't actually have to pick up the weeds that you dislodge with your hoe. Particularly good for annual weeds. I used to hand pick all the weeds and that made really heavy work, and it used to take hours to weed just even a small bed, whereas now I can do a whole entire bed this size in minutes with this. It is so low budget. I got mine for about £20, which yeah is a bit of an investment, but I use this every single time I go down the allotment. It is absolutely phenomenal. I actually have one for here and I have one for there. That's how much I absolutely adore this tool. Hoes can really fit through the gap that you leave between your vegetables, which is absolutely perfect. And I even do tend to put a little bit extra room between my onions so that I can definitely get my hoe in there, because it just makes the whole procedure super easy. The best way to stop weeds from growing is using some form of mulch. That could be absolutely anything that you can get your hands on, preferably for free. Wood chips is a really great resource that you can get for free. Grass clippings, hay, or even landscape fabric will really reduce the amount of weeds that you get each and every year. Hand weeding and hoeing are excellent ways of keeping weeds at a basic level, but sometimes life gets in the way, doesn't it? And we can't just keep up the maintenance. And when that happens, when things get crazy, either strim or use a power tool to really hit the weeds really hard. It has been a lot worse than it is now, and the reason for that is because of power tools. I used to do everything by hand, like I said, and it was a massive struggle to keep it maintained, particularly when I worked full time. But with power tools, I can neglect it, go in a couple of hours, have it back to being a beautiful, calm, weed-free allotment. I was contacted by Seedlings, which is a power tool company, and this is really cool because if you're like me and you really struggle with power tools, either the weight of them or the fact that they are super heavy and you just can't work that pull cord, then this is excellent. And I used this week to trim down a load of different things, from stinging nettles, which were growing all the way around the potatoes because we were harvesting the potatoes this week. This worked out super well. It's super lightweight. I actually love it. I'm planning to use this a lot in the fall as well to cut down my asparagus and my raspberries. I'm super excited about this. If you want to grab your hands on one of these and support the channel, then I'm going to leave the description down below, and I believe it's on sale right now. Thank you Seedlings for sponsoring this video. Now let's go back over to the allotment and see what the results were. The results of the weed killer were particularly interesting, and just to remind you, I sprayed annual weeds, docks, stinging nettles and bindweed. They're the big issues that I have down the allotment. Now each one had a really interesting effect. First off, and probably the worst one, was the bindweed. Honestly, it literally wasn't affected. It just looked like I'd fertilised it. In fact, started to flower after a week. There was a little bit of browning. The docks had some patchiness after a few days, even up to a week. I think if you kept reapplying the weed killer, it would be a lot better, but it was interesting. How I'm going to use this from the future is I'm going to cut down the docks and then spray newly forming growth. The last was the most important, most impressive result, and that was from the stinging nettles. After a day, you started seeing that there was something going on with them. There was a little bit of browning. To be honest, after this, I actually thought about giving up and completely scrapping this idea, but I'm glad I continued, because after a few days the stinging nettles had gone completely utterly brown. All the leaves were completely utterly crispy and brown and dead, and after 2 weeks, well, you can see them. It was absolutely fascinating. Would I carry on doing this? Yes. I am shocked at how much this cost. It probably cost me about £1, £2 to make absolute litres of this stuff. Whereas at the supermarket, weed killer is ridiculously expensive, and it's so questionable how it's good for your health, not good for your health. It makes me super worried about using it. Out of all of the weeds that it does affect, my absolute hate is stinging nettles. If it works on stinging nettles, I'm so happy. I don't mind pulling bindweed. Is it my favourite thing to pull? Of course not. No one likes bindweed, but it isn't the end of the world. It doesn't sting me. So I'm happily going to go ahead and spray all of the stinging nettles now with this. There is a little bit of a worry of the salt accumulating in the soil, but honestly, a few years ago when I first got this property, I had so many stinging nettles, and somebody told me if you took packets of salt and poured them on the soil, all the stinging nettles would die. And I did that, and I poured packets and packets and packets and packets of salt on the soil, and honestly it had no effect. Obviously there is a point where you put so much salt on the soil and nothing will grow, but I don't think I'm going to be anywhere close anywhere soon for my half cup in that massive bottle of weed killer. Use it with caution, and just, I'm not using this on my beds, I'm only using it on pathways and walkways and things like that. So that is not the sort of place where I want to be sowing or growing anything at this moment in time. It could change in the future. If you like this video, then I have picked this one out for you, and I thought you'd love it, so I'll see you there.